मुझे हक है, हर वक्त हक है, इस समय हक है कि मुझे हुक्म दे, आप हुक्म दे, निकलो तुम यहाँ से, मैं चला जाऊंगा। आपको हक है, मैं अलग जाके व्यक्तिगत रूप से अपना काम करूंगा। आपको हक है मुझसे कहिए कि तुम गलत काम करते हो, प्रधानमंत्री नहीं रह सकते, मैं फौरन निकल जाऊंगा।
It is the story of democracy and India and the institution that, directly or indirectly, has been the foundation of every victory down the decades. Democracy has given India its identity. Power rests in the free voice of the individual, the citizen of this country. That's the ruling motif of democracy. That freedom for the individual to do his will, to choose a leader who will benefit his interests most. The man wanted by the majority is the essence. And it has taken India places. Down these 6 decades, just this power to the individual has transformed how we live and how we work, and how we see the world, and how the world sees us. At the backbone of it all, the Election Commission of India protects and guards and celebrates and enables our democracy. It's the story of democracy and India, and the institution that, directly or indirectly, has been the foundation of every victory down the decades. 15 general elections, more than 300 elections to state legislative assemblies, 13 presidential and vice presidential elections, countless biennial and by-elections to Parliament. It has been quite a record and an unblemished one, and ready to face the future. Our story begins in 1950, a day prior to the dawn of the Indian Republic. Article 324 of the Constitution provided for setting up of an independent constitutional authority to control the electoral machinery of the country without the interference of the executive. On the 25th of January that year, the Election Commission of India came into being. In March of 1950, Sukumar Sen was appointed the first Chief Election Commissioner. The Representation of People Act followed soon after. The elections of 1952 were based on the ideal of universal adult suffrage. Every adult over 21 had the right to choose his representative. No newly independent country had attempted this. Even developed countries of the West had at first reserved the right to vote to men of property. Mobilizing personnel and material across the country was the challenge. Mammoth is a huge understatement. Consider the staggering numbers involved. An electorate of 176 million, 85% of them illiterate, 220,000 polling booths, 2 million ballot boxes, over 72,000 presiding officers and clerks, 280,000 subordinate electoral officials, and 220,000 policemen. And this is just the beginning. It was a time of logistical nightmares. The first of those the Commission has faced and surmounted over the decades. All of which set the stage for what was perhaps the biggest single exercise that independent India had ever undertaken: the general elections of 1952. The electoral journey began on 25th of October 1951 with the first parliamentary elections in the Himalayan state Himachal Pradesh, the planting of the roots of a nascent democracy. This was part of the general elections to be held in the rest of the country in January and February of 1952. Climate constraints due to heavy snowfall cutting off this area from the rest of the country necessitated early polling here. Delimitation and defining of constituencies was also an issue. Altogether, there were 2,438 single and 666 multiple member constituencies. A voter often had to cast his ballot twice to choose his candidate. Considering the low level of literacy, multiple ballot boxes were used, one for each contesting candidate with a symbol. Indelible ink applied to the voter's hand helped prevent impersonation, another first. At one stage, the idea of using smallpox vaccination in place of indelible ink was considered, though it was later dropped. Among those who turned out to vote was a 110-year-old man, propped up by his great-grandsons, and a 95-year-old woman, deaf and hunchbacked. The determination to exercise this power became one of the most notable and abiding features of the Indian electorate. Not surprisingly, these elections were defined as the biggest experiment in democracy in human history. These first elections stood out for the task at hand and its successful achievement. The might of the Election Commission of India had given but its first example: to bow out for the time being for the executive to take over, and to come forward for electoral duty again another day. 5 years later, in 1957, the Election Commission came forward again for the second Indian general elections. 1952 was a massive landmark, and so was 1957. For the pure reason that after this, even the most hard-boiled cynic had to concede that democracy in India had come to stay. Another feather in the democratic cap in 1957 was the emergence of the first serious challenge to the Congress Party. The Communist Party of India came to power in the Kerala Assembly for the first time anywhere in the free world. And a third definitive reason why these elections were special: they cost less than the last one, through diligent use of funds and the skill of reuse and recycling, even alongside the mammoth challenge of reaching out to the deepest interior. The 1957 election exercise is celebrated as a splendid illustration of prudence in public life. Victories for the Election Commission of India, for democracy, and for the people of India again. The turn of the decade, from the nascent innocence of the 1950s to an evolving readiness of the 60s, was a time of change, was new to independent India. The India-China War of 1962, death of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru were momentous in themselves. Became part of India. An amalgamation of all this and more brought in a political evolution. Under the second Chief Election Commissioner, K.V.K. Sundaram, the Election Commission of India evolved and responded to changing realities. Electorally, the 1960s were about a maturing politics, a sharp influx of candidates eager to feel the magic of being elected to power, the thrill of popular support. Political muscle began to rear its head.